Guys, this is Aker and welcome to New Dragon Stories, where dragon fantasy comes alive. I'm your narrator, and together we will explore the worlds of fire, courage, and forgotten legends.
The hatching chamber smelled like sulfur and old stone. David Reed knelt beside the last two eggs in the clutch, watching cracks spread across their dull grey shells. Around him, the other dragon hatchlings screeched and tumbled over each other, their scales already bright crimson and gold. They breathed little puffs of smoke and snapped at anything that moved. These two eggs were different, smaller, quieter. The shells looked worn, almost dusty compared to the glossy fragments scattered around the chamber. Still waiting on the runts, Keeper Thrin clicked his mandibles together in what David had learned was the insectoid version of a dismissive laugh. Waste of time, look at the others, strong, aggressive, perfect specimens. David did not answer. He kept his eyes on the eggs. One of them rocked slightly. A small crack appeared, then another. A tiny snout pushed through, pale copper instead of brilliant red. The hatchling struggled free and lay there, breathing hard. Its scales were smooth but lacked the metallic shine of its siblings. Its eyes opened, deep amber, and it looked directly at David. The second egg broke apart moments later. This hatchling was even paler, almost silver-gray. It was smaller than the copper one, with a longer, more serpentine body. It made no sound at all as it freed itself from the shell. Across the chamber, Director Vessa entered with her usual grace. Her crystalline body refracted the light into rainbow patterns on the walls. She was beautiful and cold in equal measure. Her gaze swept over the vibrant hatchlings, then stopped on the two pale ones. "Are those the last?" Her voice had the quality of wind chimes. "Yes, Director." David stood up, instinctively moving between her and the hatchlings. "Just hatched." "They look weak." She moved closer, her faceted eyes examining them with clinical precision. "Coloring is poor, size below standard. Have they attempted flame production?" "They just hatched 30 seconds ago." The others were breathing smoke within 10 seconds. Vessa reached down with one crystalline finger and prodded the copper hatchling. It did not snap or hiss. Instead, it watched her with those calm amber eyes. No fire response, no aggression display. These are defective. The word hung in the air like a sentence. David felt his jaw tighten. They need time to develop. "We do not have unlimited resources, David Reed." Vessa straightened up. "The Starfher Dragon Preservation Program accepts only viable specimens. These two are clearly genetic failures. The kindest thing is to euthanize them before they suffer." No, the word came out harder than David intended. Vessa turned her full attention to him. "Excuse me. Give me time to observe them, 2 weeks. If they show no signs of normal development, then we can discuss options." David knew he was pushing his luck. Human staff members at the preserve were technically consultants, not decision-makers. But he also knew Vessa valued thorough documentation. "You want complete records, right? This could be important genetic data." The director was silent for a long moment. Around them, the healthy hatchlings continued their chaos, wrestling and breathing small jets of flame at each other. The two pale ones stayed still, watching everything. 2 weeks, Vessa finally said, but they cannot remain with the clutch. The strong ones are already rejecting them. Separate them immediately. If they show no improvement, we terminate the observation. She looked at the hatchlings one more time. Mistakes happen in nature, David Reed. We should not prolong their suffering out of misplaced sentiment. She left in a shimmer of refracted light. Thrin approached, shaking his head. "You are too soft. This is why humans make poor conservationists. You see a weak thing and want to save it. Nature does not work that way." "Maybe." David carefully scooped up both hatchlings. They were warm in his hands, their scales smooth as river stones. Neither one struggled or tried to bite. The copper one made a small chirping sound, almost like a question. "Or maybe we do not understand what we are looking at yet." 2 weeks of wasted effort. Thrin turned away. "I will prepare the disposal protocols now. Save us time later." David carried the hatchlings to one of the smaller observation rooms. It was basic but clean, with climate controls and a feeding station. He set them down gently on a warming pad and watched as they oriented themselves. They did not fight each other for the best spot. Instead, they curled up together, the silver one resting its head on the copper one's back. He pulled up his data pad and started a new file. Subject 1, copper coloring, female, approximately 40 centimeters long. Subject 2, silver gray coloring, male, approximately 35 centimeters long. Both responsive, alert, non-aggressive. As he typed, the copper hatchling uncurled and moved toward him. She was tentative, placing each foot carefully. When she reached his boot, she looked up at him and made that chirping sound again. David slowly extended his hand. She sniffed it, then pressed her snout against his palm. Her scales were not just smooth. They were soft, almost like suede. The sensation was completely different from the rough, armored feeling of the other hatchlings. The silver one watched this interaction, then slowly approached as well. He was even more cautious, circling around to approach from the side. When he finally made contact, he simply leaned against David's leg, a small point of warmth. "You two are different," David said quietly, "but different does not mean wrong." The copper hatchling chirped again. This time, the silver one answered with a soft trill. David smiled despite the weight of the deadline hanging over them. 2 weeks to prove these creatures deserved to live. 2 weeks to understand what made them different. He looked at their calm, intelligent eyes and made a decision. He would call them Copper and Silver, simple names, and he would find out the truth about them, whatever it took. Outside the observation room, the regular hatchlings screamed and fought. Inside, Copper and Silver settled down to sleep, peaceful and quiet. Different, David thought again, not defective, just different. He had 2 weeks to prove it. 5 days had passed, and David's observation notes filled dozens of pages. He sat cross-legged on the floor of the observation room, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten beside him. Copper was curled around his left arm like a living bracelet, her breathing slow and steady. Silver perched on a shelf above, watching David's fingers move across the data pad screen. The behavior patterns were remarkable. When David had introduced the standard intelligence tests designed for adult dragons, Copper and Silver had approached them with curiosity rather than aggression. The puzzle boxes that should have taken weeks to solve were opened in hours. They did not smash or burn their way through. They observed, tested, and adapted. "You are still wasting time." Thrin stood in the doorway, his compound eyes reflecting the room's soft light. "The healthy clutch is ready for transfer evaluation. Director Vesser wants your space." 9 more days, David said without looking up. "We had an agreement." "An agreement she regrets." Thrin stepped inside. "A wealthy collector arrives tomorrow. He pays premium prices for staff her dragons. The director needs every facility perfect for his inspection." The insectoid's mandibles clicked. "Your pets are an embarrassment." David felt Copper tighten slightly around his arm, not painful, just responsive. He stroked her head gently. "They are not pets, they are research subjects." Research into failure. But Thrin's tone had shifted slightly. He was looking at Silver, who had climbed down from the shelf and was now sorting a pile of colored blocks by shade, arranging them in a perfect gradient. "Though I admit, their cognitive function is unusual." "Unusual is one word for it." David pulled up a video file on his pad. "Watch this." The recording showed Copper and Silver in the room alone. David had left a complex locking mechanism on the floor, the kind used to train adult dragons for captive breeding programs. In the video, Copper examined it from all angles while Silver watched. Then they switched positions. Silver tried one approach while Copper observed. After 3 attempts, they both worked on it together, and the lock opened. "Tool use and cooperation," David said. "They are teaching each other." Thrin was silent for a moment. Staffer dragons are not cooperative hunters, they are solitary apex predators. These two did not get that message. David closed the video. Every test shows the same pattern. They communicate, they plan, they help each other. That is not defective behavior. It is just different behavior. Different does not mean valuable. Thrin turned to Lave, then paused. "The director wants a decision in 3 days, not 9. The collector is impatient. Either prove they are worth keeping or accept the inevitable. After Thrin left, David sat in the heavy silence. 3 days instead of 9. He looked at Copper, who had unwound from his arm and was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. Silver had stopped sorting blocks and was also staring. "You understand something is wrong, do not you?" David whispered. Copper made a soft sound, somewhere between a chirp and a hum. She moved closer and pressed her snout against David's chest, right over his heart. Silver climbed into his lap and did the same thing. David felt his throat tighten. In all his years working with animals, he had never experienced anything like this. It was not just affection, it felt like understanding, like they knew he was worried and wanted to help. That night David could not sleep. He sat at his desk, searching through the Galactic database for anything related to dragon variants. Most files were basic: size, coloring, fire temperature, territorial range, nothing about cooperative behavior or advanced problem solving. Then, buried in a subfolder marked as historical mythology, he found something. A scanned document, barely readable, written in an Earth language he needed the translator for. It was a paper from 200 years ago, authored by a human named Dr. Sarah Webb, a xenoanthropologist who had studied extinct civilizations. The paper described an archaeological dig on a dead planet in the Outer Rim. Among the ruins of an ancient palace, they had found dragon remains, not in cages or pens, but in places of honor, beside thrones, in temple sanctuaries, in what appeared to be healing chambers. Dr. Webb had written, "The remains show distinct morphological differences from known staff dragon fossils: smaller body size, smoother scale structure, elongated skeletal frame. No evidence of fire-breathing apparatus in the throat structure, but found in every significant cultural site, always treated with reverence. Preliminary theory: these dragons served a purpose beyond hunting or warfare. Possible roles: companions, advisors, or perhaps something we lack the cultural context to understand." David read the passage 3 times. His hands were shaking. There was a soft sound behind him. He turned to find both Copper and Silver awake, watching him from their warming pad. Their scales seemed to catch the light differently now, almost shimmering. "You are not defective," David said to them. "You are something else, something people forgot about." He spent the rest of the night searching for more references. He found fragments in folklore databases, stories from a dozen different pre-spaceflight cultures, all mentioning dragons without fire. Some called them silent wings, others called them heart scales. One particularly old text called them soul guardians. But all the stories had one thing in common: these dragons were treasured above all others. When morning came, David had a plan. It was risky, but he had less than 3 days. He needed to demonstrate what Copper and Silver could do in a way that Director Vesser could not ignore. Lisa Park entered the observation room with his breakfast. She was the only other human on staff, a veterinary specialist who David had known for years. She set down the food tray and looked at the dragons. "Thrin says you are fighting a losing battle," she said quietly. "Maybe," David took a cup of coffee from the tray, "but I found something last night. These dragons, they are not a mutation, they are a variant, an ancient one that people stopped recognizing." "A variant of what?" "I am not sure yet, but look at this." David called Copper over. She came immediately, her movements graceful. He held out his hand, palm up. Copper gentle. The dragon placed her front foot in his hand with perfect control. Her claws, which could have torn his skin, rested with no pressure at all. "Now watch." David turned to Lisa. "Can you pretend to be upset, like you are crying?" Lisa gave him a strange look, but played along. She covered her face and made sobbing sounds. Within seconds, Silver had crossed the room. The dragon approached Lisa and made a soft, concerned trill. When Lisa lowered her hands, Silver pressed against her leg, the same way he had done with David days before. Lisa's false tears stopped. She looked down at the dragon in genuine surprise. That felt real, like he actually cared. "Because I think he does." David watched as Copper joined Silver, both dragons now focused on Lisa with clear concern. They respond to emotions, not just commands or food or territory. They respond to how we feel. Lisa slowly reached down and touched Silver's head. The dragon leaned into her hand, his scales warm and soft. I have never seen anything like this. Neither has anyone else, because everyone is looking for fire and aggression. David finished his coffee. We are looking at the wrong measures. Can you prove it in 3 days? I have to try. That afternoon, David requested a formal meeting with Director Vesser. She granted him 15 minutes. He brought copper and silver with him, carrying them in a travel container designed for small specimens. Vesser's office was all crystal and cold light. She sat behind a desk that seemed to be carved from a single massive gemstone. When David entered, she did not look up from her data screens. Your time is nearly expired, David Reed. I know, but I need to show you something first. David opened the container. Copper and silver emerged, looking around the unfamiliar space with curiosity but no fear. Vesser finally looked at them. They have grown, slightly, still below average size. Size is not the right metric. David took a breath. Director, have you ever heard of empathic species? Of course, several dozen across the galaxy. Most are telepathic or produce pheromone-based emotional responses. What if I told you these dragons are empathic, not through telepathy or pheromones, but through behavioral response and biochemical interaction? Vesser's crystalline features could not show expression, but her voice held skepticism. That would be an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence. I can provide it, but I need more time, and I need test subjects who are experiencing genuine emotional distress. Absolutely not. I will not allow you to experiment on staff or specimens. Then test me. David sat down in the chair across from her desk. I have been under significant stress, worried about these dragons, about my work, about the deadline. That is real emotional distress, right? Vesser was silent for a moment. Proceed. David looked at Copper and Silver. Both dragons were watching the conversation with focused attention. He did not give them any commands. He simply sat there, letting his genuine worry and fear show on his face. Copper moved first. She climbed up the chair and onto David's lap, then up to his chest. She pressed her snout against his collarbone and made a soft humming sound. Silver followed, climbing up David's leg and settling against his side. Within seconds, David felt something change. The tight knot of anxiety in his chest loosened. His breathing, which had been shallow, deepened. The racing thoughts slowed. It was not dramatic or magical. It was subtle, like the emotional equivalent of a gentle hand on a shoulder. Vesser stood up and moved closer. Your vital signs, they are changing. She checked a scanner built into her desk. Heart rate decreasing, stress hormone levels dropping, blood pressure normalizing. They are doing that, David said quietly. I am not imagining it. This is what they do. The director watched the dragons for a long moment. Copper's scales had taken on a very faint glow, barely visible. Silver's body temperature had increased slightly, radiating gentle warmth. This is remarkable, Vesser admitted, but I still do not understand how it makes them valuable to the preserve. We conserve species for ecological balance and genetic diversity, not for therapeutic applications. Before David could respond, an alarm blared through the station. Emergency lights flashed red. Vesser's desk lit up with urgent messages. A mechanical voice echoed through the walls. Hull breach in Sector 7, power core instability, 3 workers trapped, rescue teams responding. Vesser's attention snapped to the crisis. David stood up, careful not to disturb the dragons. Director, he said, let me help. She looked at him like he was insane. You are a xenobiologist, not a rescue technician. No, but I have 2 dragons who can do something your rescue team cannot. David met her crystalline gaze. Give me a chance to prove their value. If I am wrong, you can terminate the observation immediately. If I am right, you will see what they are really capable of. The alarm continued to blare. Vessa's desk showed chaotic updates from the disaster zone, panicked workers, unstable structure, rescue teams unable to make progress. She looked at David, then at the dragons. "Go," she said, "but if you get yourself killed, I am putting that in your permanent record." David grabbed the travel container and carefully placed copper and silver inside. As he ran towards Sector 7, he could feel his heart pounding. 3 days had become 3 hours. Everything depended on what happened next. The service tunnel reeked of burning plastic and coolant chemicals. Emergency lights cast everything in harsh red shadows. David could hear screaming from deeper in the collapsed section, voices pitched high with panic and pain. His protective mask filtered the toxic air, but his eyes still watered from the acrid smoke. "You should not be here, human." Rescue Chief Borin blocked his path, his reptilian scales dark with soot. Behind him, 3 rescue technicians worked frantically to stabilize a partially collapsed support beam. "This is for trained emergency personnel only." "Director Vessa authorized me." David held up his clearance badge, then gestured to the container holding copper and silver. "I can help the trapped workers." With baby dragons, Borin's head spines flared in disbelief. "The workers are in shock. One is hyperventilating so badly he is using up oxygen too fast. Another keeps thrashing around and making the collapse worse. The third will not respond to anything. We cannot reach them safely until they calm down, and they will not calm down." He pointed at the unstable tunnel. "You want to take infants into that death trap." "They are not ordinary dragons." David moved past Borin before the chief could stop him. "How much time do the workers have?" 20 minutes, maybe less." Borin grabbed David's shoulder, then seemed to think better of it and let go. "If you die in there, I am not explaining it to your family." "I do not have family on this station." David checked his breathing equipment one more time. "Just make sure your team is ready to extract everyone when I give the signal." He moved into the tunnel before Borin could argue further. The passage was narrow, with jagged metal edges where the walls had buckled. Exposed wiring sparked occasionally, and the floor tilted at a dangerous angle. David had to climb over debris piles, the container with the dragons strapped to his chest. Through his mask, he could hear the trapped workers more clearly now. One voice, high and wheezing, speaking in rapid Centaurian. Another voice, deeper, shouting threats at invisible enemies in a language David's translator struggled to process. The third made no sound at all. The tunnel opened into what had been a power relay chamber. Now it was a nightmare of twisted metal and broken machinery. 3 aliens huddled in different corners of the space, separated by fallen equipment and structural damage. The air here was worse, thick with fumes that made David's eyes burn even through the mask. The Centaurian worker, a thin being with 4 arms and crystalline skin, was curled into a ball. Her breathing came in rapid, shallow gasps. Each breath seemed to panic her more. David recognized hyperventilation shock. If she did not calm down soon, she would pass out and stop breathing entirely. The second worker was a large, furred creature David recognized as a Tharan. He was bleeding from a head wound and swinging his massive arms at nothing, roaring about enemies attacking. The movement was making the ceiling supports groan ominously. The third worker, a Quilvan with blue skin and multiple eyes, simply sat against the wall, staring at nothing. Her eyes were open but unfocused, complete psychological shutdown. David knelt and opened the container. Copper and silver emerged, their scales picking up the red emergency lighting in strange ways. They looked around the chamber, then at David, then at the trapped workers. Neither dragon showed fear, just focused attention. "Okay," David whispered to them. "We talked about this kind of thing. Different species, different distress responses. But the principle is the same, right? You feel what they feel, you respond to it." Copper chirped once, a sound that seemed too calm for the chaos around them. Silver made an answering trill. David pointed to the Centaurian. "Copper, that one first. She needs to breathe slower." The dragon moved without hesitation, her serpentine body navigating the debris with easy grace. When she reached the Centaurian, The panicking alien did not even notice at first. She was too lost in her own terror, her forearms wrapped around herself, her breathing now making horrible whistling sounds. Copper did not force contact. She simply positioned herself in the Centaurian's line of sight and began to glow. It was faint, that same soft bioluminescence David had seen in his office. The light pulsed in a steady rhythm, slow and regular. The Centaurian's eyes fixed on it. Her breathing was still rapid, but David saw her starting to match the rhythm of the light. Pulse, breathe, pulse, breathe. Copper moved a little closer, still glowing, still maintaining that steady pattern. Within 30 seconds, the Centaurian's breathing had slowed. Within a minute, it was almost normal. She uncurled slightly, her forearms relaxing. She reached out with one shaking hand and touched Copper's head. The dragon pressed back gently, and the glow intensified just a little. The Centaurian worker started crying, but the tears were relief, not panic. David turned his attention to the Tharan. The big alien was still swinging his arms, still roaring. Blood from his head wound had matted his fur, and his eyes were wild. This was going to be harder. "Silver," David called. "The big one, can you try?" Silver looked at the Tharan for a long moment, then at David, then back at the injured worker. The small dragon chirped, a sound that somehow conveyed uncertainty. The Tharan was easily 50 times Silver's size and radiating violence. "I know," David said softly, "but I trust you, and I think you know what to do." Silver moved forward, much more cautiously than Copper had. The Tharan noticed the movement and swung an arm in Silver's direction, roaring a challenge. Silver froze but did not run. Instead, the dragon lowered himself flat against the floor in a submissive posture David had never seen before. The Tharan roared again, but there was confusion in it now. Why was this small thing not running? Why was it making itself vulnerable? Silver began to glow, softer than Copper's light. The dragon made a sound, a deep rumbling that vibrated through the floor. It was not aggressive or fearful. It was soothing, almost like a lullaby. The Tharan's next roar was weaker. He swung again, but the movement was slower, less coordinated. Silver stayed flat, kept glowing, kept making that deep rumbling sound. David held his breath. This had to work. If the Tharan connected with a full-strength blow, Silver would be killed instantly. But the blow never came. The Tharan took a step forward, then his legs buckled. He collapsed to his knees, his arms dropping to his sides. The wild look in his eyes faded, replaced by confusion and pain. He touched his own head wound, seemed to realize he was injured, and made a whimpering sound. Silver immediately moved closer, pressing against the Tharan's leg. The big alien looked down at the tiny dragon and started to cry, huge tears rolling through his blood-matted fur. 2 down, 1 to go. The Quilvan worker had not moved or reacted to anything happening around her. David approached slowly, with both dragons following. This was the hardest case, complete dissociation. The worker's mind had basically shut down to protect itself from overwhelming trauma. David knelt in front of her. "Can you hear me? We are here to help." No response. The Quilvan's multiple eyes stared through him at nothing. Copper and Silver both approached her together. They positioned themselves on either side, close but not touching. Then, simultaneously, they both began to glow. Their lights merged, creating a gentle sphere of illumination around the Quilvan worker. David watched, fascinated. The dragons were not just calming her, they were creating a space that felt safe. The light was warm without being hot. The humming sounds they made blended into something almost musical. Slowly, painfully slowly, the Quilvan's eyes began to focus. First on the light, then on the dragons, then on David. Her mouth moved, forming words without sound. "You are safe," David said gently. "We are getting you out of here. Can you stand?" The Quilvan blinked. One of her hands moved slightly, reaching toward Copper. The dragon met her halfway, pressing her snout into the Quilvan's palm. The worker's fingers closed around it gently. "Safe," the Quilvan whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "Safe now." "Yes, safe now." David activated his communicator. Boren, all 3 workers are stable. You can send in the extraction team. How is that possible? The rescue chief's voice crackled with static. We heard the Tharan roaring 2 minutes ago. Just trust me, get your people in here. We need medical support. The extraction took 15 minutes. The rescue team moved carefully, stabilizing the structure as they worked. The Centaurian walked out on her own, clutching copper like a lifeline. The Tharan needed help due to his injuries, but he stayed calm throughout, keeping one hand on Silver. The Quilvan required a stretcher, but her eyes stayed focused, tracking the dragons as they moved alongside her. David followed them out, his legs shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. As they emerged into the main corridor, Director Vessa was waiting. Her crystalline form seemed to glow with its own light under the normal illumination. Medical teams are standing by, she said. Then she looked at David, at the dragons, at the 3 rescued workers being loaded onto gurneys. Explain what happened in there. They did exactly what I said they could do. David gently retrieved copper and silver from the workers, who protested weakly. They responded to emotional distress with calming behavior and biochemical responses that lowered stress levels. They did it with 3 different species simultaneously. That is not a defect, Director. That is an ability. One of the medical technicians, a tall alien with too many joints, approached Vessa. Director, the workers' vital signs are remarkable. The Centaurian's oxygen levels normalized impossibly fast. The Tharan should be in severe shock from his injuries, but is stable. The Quilvan is responsive when she should be catatonic for hours. The technician looked at the dragons. What did they do? Something we forgot was possible, David said quietly. Vessa was silent for a long time, her faceted eyes watching copper and silver. The dragons looked tired but alert, their scales no longer glowing. Come to my office in 1 hour, Vessa finally said. Bring them, we need to discuss the future of this project. As she walked away, Boren approached David. The rescue chief's spines were flattened against his head in what David recognized as a gesture of respect. I have been doing rescue work for 20 years, Boren said. I have never seen anything like that. Those workers should not have survived the psychological trauma, let alone helped with their own rescue. The dragons gave them a reason to keep fighting, David replied. Sometimes that is all anyone needs. Back in the observation room, David checked copper and silver thoroughly. They were exhausted but unhurt. He set them on their warming pad and watched them curl up together, already falling asleep. His hands were still shaking. They had done it. Against all odds, in the most dangerous possible test, the dragons had proven themselves. But as David looked at their peaceful sleeping forms, he felt a new worry forming. He had wanted to prove they were valuable. Now he had. And in a galaxy where valuable things were bought, sold, and exploited, that might be the most dangerous outcome of all. The hour passed too quickly. When David entered Vessa's office with the dragons, he found he was not alone. Thrin was there, so was Lisa, and a tall, elaborately dressed alien David did not recognize, wearing enough jewelry to buy a small planet. David Reed, Vessa said, meet Collector Harvan. He arrived early to inspect our Starfher Dragon Clutch. I thought he should see your discovery as well. The wealthy collector's eyes fixed on copper and silver, with an intensity that made David's stomach turn cold. Fascinating, Harvan said, his voice oily and smooth. Absolutely fascinating, how much? Collector Harvan circled the observation table where copper and silver rested. His movements were predatory despite his elegant clothing. 6 fingers on each hand drummed against his jeweled belt as he studied the dragons with calculating eyes. I will offer triple my usual rate, Harvan said without looking at Vessa. These specimens are unique. My clients would pay extraordinary sums for therapeutic dragons. He leaned closer to Copper, who watched him warily. Imagine the wealthy elite across the galaxy, each with their own empathic dragon. The status alone would be priceless. They are not for sale. David stepped between Harvan and the dragons. They are research subjects under active study. Everything is for sale, human, Harvan smiled, showing too many teeth. Director Vessa understands this. The preserve operates on limited funding. My offer could support your conservation efforts for years. He finally looked at Vesa. Surely that is worth more than a research project. Vesa's crystalline features revealed nothing. The offer is substantial. It would indeed resolve many of our financial concerns. David felt cold spread through his chest. Director, you cannot be serious. We just discovered what they are. We do not even understand their full capabilities yet. Which is precisely why they are valuable, Harvan interrupted. Rare, useful, and mysterious. The perfect combination. He pulled out a data pad and entered numbers. I will also take the regular Staff Dragon clutch at full price. Consider it a package deal. The regular clutch has been problematic, Thrin spoke up from his corner. His mandibles clicked with agitation. They have become increasingly aggressive. 2 handlers were injured yesterday. They fight constantly, refuse proper feeding schedules, and have damaged their enclosure 3 times. Harvan waved a dismissive hand. Aggression can be managed with proper containment. I have facilities designed for dangerous specimens. They were not this aggressive before, Lisa said quietly. She had been silent until now, standing near the wall. The behavioral change started about 5 days ago, right after we separated copper and silver from the clutch. Everyone turned to look at her. Explain, Vesa commanded. Lisa pulled up data on her pad. I have been monitoring the main clutch because their buyer was coming. The first 3 days after separation, they were normal, competitive, yes, but within expected parameters. Then the aggression escalated. They started fighting each other seriously, refusing to eat unless they were alone, destroying enrichment items instead of using them. She looked at David. I think they miss copper and silver. Ridiculous, Harvan scoffed. Dragons are solitary hunters. They do not form social bonds with siblings. Staff dragons are solitary, David said slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind. But what if they are not supposed to be? What if the clutch is supposed to stay together with different types serving different roles? He moved to Vesa's display screen and pulled up the video from the hatching chamber. Look at the timeline. In the wild, Staff dragon clutches stay together for the first 6 months. We always assumed that was just because the young ones needed to learn hunting. But what if it is more than that? David zoomed in on footage of the newly hatched clutch before the separation. See here, the aggressive hatchlings are play fighting, but watch what happens when one gets hurt. In the video, a small hatchling squealed after being bitten too hard. Immediately, Copper moved over and nuzzled it. The injured hatchling calmed down and the play resumed more gently. Copper was regulating their behavior, Lisa breathed. She was teaching them limits. And Silver was doing something else. David scrolled forward. Watch the feeding time. The largest hatchlings try to hoard all the food. Silver positions himself between the food source and the dominant ones, creating space for the smaller hatchlings to eat. He was ensuring fair distribution. Thrin moved closer to the screen, his compound eyes reflecting the footage. I dismissed this as weak behavior, but you are suggesting it was cooperative behavior. More than that, David pulled up the xenoanthropology paper he had found. This research suggests that ancient staff dragon populations had empathic variants in every clutch. What if we have been misunderstanding the species entirely? What if they evolved to be social, with aggressive and empathic members balancing each other? That would explain the behavioral degradation, Vesa said thoughtfully. Separating them disrupted a natural social structure. Harvan's expression had soured. This is all speculation. You have no proof that reconnecting them would solve anything. Then let me test it. David looked at Vesa. Before you make any decisions about selling them, let me try reuniting the clutch. If I am wrong, nothing changes. If I am right, you will have something far more valuable than individual dragons. What could be more valuable than unique therapeutic specimens? Harvan demanded. Understanding, David said simply. If we can prove that staff dragons need both types to be healthy, it changes everything we know about the species. It could revolutionize dragon conservation across the galaxy. Vesa was silent for a long moment. Collector Harvan, I must ask you to wait outside. while we discuss this internally. Absolutely not. I came here with a purchase contract and full payment authorization. Harvan's voice rose. You cannot delay this decision. I can and I will. Vessa's tone cut like glass. You will wait in the guest quarters. You have my word that no other buyers will be contacted before you receive my final decision. Harvan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Vessa's crystalline gaze stopped him. He left with poor grace, his expensive robes swishing dramatically. After the door sealed, Vessa turned to David. You have one chance at this. If reuniting the clutch results in more violence or injuries, the experiment ends immediately. All dragons will be sold, including copper and silver. Understood. David felt Copper press against his leg. She had been unusually quiet during the entire discussion, as if she understood the stakes. I have concerns, Thrin said. The aggressive hatchlings are much larger now. They may attack copper and silver on sight. We separated them because the clutch was rejecting them. That was when the aggressive ones did not understand what they were missing, Lisa countered. Now they are suffering without the balance. They might respond differently. Or they might kill the empathic hatchlings in their frustration, Thrin replied. It is too dangerous. David looked down at Copper and Silver. Both dragons were watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. They did not look afraid. If anything, they looked eager. They want to try, David said. I think they know their siblings need them. Dragons do not think that way, Thrin insisted. These ones do. David knelt down and let both dragons climb onto his arms. They proved in the rescue that they understand others' distress and want to help. Why would their siblings be different? Vessa made a decision. We proceed, but with precautions. The reunion will take place in the main enclosure. Full medical team on standby. Security ready to intervene if violence occurs. If copper or silver show signs of serious distress, we extract them immediately. Thank you, Director. Do not thank me yet. Vessa's voice was cold. If this fails, David Reed, you will have proven that sentiment has no place in conservation science. I will use this as a case study for why human handlers are too emotional for this work. An hour later, David stood outside the main dragon enclosure. Through the transparent wall, he could see the aggressive hatchlings. They had grown significantly, their scales now deep crimson and bright gold. They paced restlessly, occasionally breathing jets of flame at each other. The enclosure showed signs of damage, scorch marks on the walls, and broken enrichment equipment scattered around. Lisa stood beside him, medical scanner ready. Their stress hormones are extremely elevated. Heart rates are too fast. If they were human, I would say they are having collective anxiety attacks. They are suffering without their clutch mates, David said, just like the workers in the tunnel were suffering until copper and silver helped them. Thrin operated the enclosure controls. I have sedation systems ready. If the aggressive ones attack, I can deploy sleeping gas within seconds. Let's hope it does not come to that. David looked down at Copper and Silver, who were calm in his arms. Ready. Copper chirped, Silver trilled softly. Okay, together. Thrin opened the enclosure door. David stepped through, and the change in atmosphere was immediate. The aggressive hatchlings all turned to stare. The largest one, a crimson male with golden eyes, growled deep in his throat. Smoke curled from his nostrils. David set Copper and Silver down gently and stepped back toward the door. For a moment, nothing happened. The aggressive hatchlings stared at the empathic ones. Copper and Silver stayed still, not submissive but calm. Then the crimson male charged. Sedation now, Thrin shouted. Wait, David held up his hand, stopping him. The crimson hatchling crossed half the enclosure in seconds, his jaws open, flame building in his throat. He was going to incinerate them, but at the last possible moment, Silver moved, not away from the attack, but toward it. Silver positioned himself directly in the crimson's path and dropped flat to the ground, the same submissive posture he had used with the injured Theron. The crimson hatchling skidded to a stop, confused. Why was his prey not running? Copper moved to Silver's side. Both empathic dragons began to glow, that soft bioluminescence filling the enclosure with gentle light. They made sounds together, a harmonized humming that seemed to vibrate through the air. The crimson hatchling took a step back. The flame in his throat guttered out. He tilted his head, his aggression faltering. The other aggressive hatchlings approached cautiously, a golden female, a scarlet male, two smaller ones with mixed coloring. All of them had been packing and fighting moments ago. Now they were drawn to the light and sound like moths to a lamp. Copper stood up slowly and approached the crimson male. She reached out with her snout and touched his face gently. The large hatchling flinched, then leaned into the touch. A sound came from his throat, not a growl but something else, something that sounded almost like relief. Within minutes, all the aggressive hatchlings had gathered around Copper and Silver. The empathic dragons moved among them, touching each one, their glow spreading like warmth through the group. The aggressive ones stopped packing, their rapid breathing slowed. One by one, they settled down. The crimson male curled up with Silver leaning against his side. The golden female wrapped protectively around Copper. The entire clutch, aggressive and empathic together, formed a single peaceful group. "Impossible," Thrin whispered. "I have never seen Starfish dragons behave this way." "Because we have never seen complete Starfish dragons," Lisa said, her eyes wide. "We have only seen half the equation." David felt something break open in his chest, a tension he had been carrying for days. They were never meant to be separate. The aggressive ones are not better or worse than the empathic ones. They need each other. Vesa had joined them at the observation window. She watched the peaceful clutch in silence for several minutes. "This changes everything," she finally said. "If this behavior pattern holds, it means our entire approach to Starfish dragon conservation has been flawed. We have been selecting only the aggressive traits because we thought those were the successful ones. And in doing so, you are creating incomplete dragons," David said. "Dragons that could not regulate themselves, could not form proper social structures, could not thrive. The galaxy needs to know about this." Lisa was already recording data. Every preserve, every breeding program, every conservation effort needs this information. Thrin's mandibles clicked rapidly. Collector Harvin will be displeased. He cannot purchase part of a social unit. "He cannot purchase any of them," Vesa said firmly. "This clutch stays together for study. If we are going to understand this properly, we need to observe their complete development." She looked at David. "You were right, David Reed. I was wrong. That is worth admitting." David nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in his throat. Inside the enclosure, Copper looked toward the window and met his eyes. Her scales glowed a little brighter, just for a moment, and David could have sworn she was smiling. "Now comes the hard part," Vesa continued, telling Harvin he cannot buy them. "Let me handle that," David said. "I have some thoughts about how to explain the value of keeping them together." As they left the observation area, David looked back one more time at the peaceful clutch. Copper and Silver, the ones everyone had wanted to throw away, were now the center of their siblings' world. The aggressive dragons were calmer with them present. The empathic dragons were braver with their siblings to protect them. Together, they were complete. And David understood something about humanity that he had never quite articulated before. Earth's history was full of people discarding those who were different, only to discover later that those differences were essential. It had taken humans thousands of years to learn that lesson. Maybe, David thought, we can help other species learn it faster. 3 weeks had passed since the clutch reunion, and the main dragon enclosure had transformed from a war zone into something resembling a functional family unit. David stood at the observation window with his morning coffee, watching the daily routine unfold. The crimson male, whom the staff had started calling Blaze, was teaching the two smaller hatchlings how to produce flame properly. He demonstrated the technique, breathing a controlled jet of fire at a target stone. The smaller ones tried to copy him, managing only puffs of smoke. Copper sat nearby, her presence keeping Blaze patient when he otherwise might have gotten frustrated with their slow progress. Silver was curled up with the golden female, both of them watching the lesson. The golden one, Grace, had become Silver's constant companion, positioning herself protectively whenever he moved around the enclosure. It was a partnership, David had realized. Silver kept Grace emotionally balanced, and Grace kept Silver physically safe. The behavioral data is remarkable. Lisa entered the observation room with a tablet full of charts. Aggression incidents are down 97%. Feeding cooperation has improved to the point where even the smallest hatchling gets proper nutrition. And look at this. She pulled up a graph. Their individual stress markers have dropped to baseline healthy levels. They are thriving, David said. As a complete unit, they are everything they should be. Which makes our current problem even more complicated. Lisa's expression darkened. Harvan is still here. He has been lodging formal complaints with the Galactic Conservation Council for 3 weeks. He claims Vesa is violating purchase agreements and acting in bad faith. He never had a purchase agreement for copper and silver. No, but he did have one for the regular clutch, and now Vesa is refusing to separate them. Lisa set down her tablet. Legally, he might have a case. The preserve did accept his deposit. David's jaw tightened. We cannot split them up. It would destroy everything we have learned. I know, but Harvan has powerful friends. If he pushes this to a legal challenge, the preserve could lose its conservation licenses. Vesa is protecting the dragons, but it is costing her politically. Before David could respond, an alarm chimed. Not the emergency klaxon from before, but a notification tone. Vesa's voice came through the intercom system. David Reed, report to conference room 7 immediately. Bring current dragon behavioral data. Lisa and David exchanged glances. That sounds official, she said. Conference room 7 was the preserve's formal meeting space, used for visiting dignitaries and legal proceedings. When David entered, he found it packed with people he did not recognize. Aliens from a dozen different species, all wearing official-looking credentials. Vesa sat at the head of the table, her crystalline form rigid with tension. Harvan sat across from her, looking smug. David Reed, xenobiologist assigned to the Starbound Dragon project. Vesa's introduction was clipped and formal. These are representatives from the Galactic Conservation Council. They are here to review the preserve's recent decisions regarding specimen management. An elderly alien with too many eyes and elaborate robes spoke first. Mr. Reed, we have reviewed Collector Harvan's complaints. He claims that Director Vesa has arbitrarily changed the terms of a legal purchase agreement, citing questionable research that has not been peer-reviewed or validated by independent sources. All of his eyes focused on David. Is this research legitimate, or is it sentiment masquerading as science? David felt the weight of multiple gazes. This was it. Everything came down to this moment. The research is legitimate, he said clearly. We have documented behavioral changes across the entire clutch that demonstrate social dependency between aggressive and empathic variants. Separation causes measurable psychological distress. Reunion results in improved health markers across all specimens. Psychological distress in dragons? Another council member, this one with metallic skin, sounded skeptical. Dragons are not social creatures. They do not experience complex emotions. These dragons do, David replied, and I can prove it. He pulled up his data on the room's display screen. Charts showing stress hormones, behavioral incident reports, health markers, all clearly marked with the separation and reunion dates. The evidence was undeniable. This could be coincidence, Harvan interjected, or manipulation of data to support a desired outcome. It is not. Thrin's voice surprised everyone. The insectoid keeper stood up from where he had been sitting quietly in the corner. I was skeptical of David Reed's theories. I called them sentiment and emotional weakness. I was wrong. Thrin's mandibles clicked as he approached the display. I have worked with staffer dragons for 15 years. I have never seen stable social behavior in a clutch. Every previous group has shown escalating aggression until separation was required. This clutch is different. The only variable is the presence of empathic variants that were not culled at hatching. Cold, one of the council members looked shocked. Standard practice, Harvan said dismissively. Weak specimens are removed to preserve resources for viable ones. And in doing so, we have been damaging the species for generations, Thrin continued. This clutch proves that staffer dragons are meant to be social. We have been selecting against the very traits that allow them to form stable groups. A council member with feathers and a sharp beak leaned forward. If this is true, it has massive implications for conservation policy across the galaxy. How many species have we been mismanaging because we did not understand their social structures? That is exactly why this research must continue, Vesa said. This clutch represents a chance to correct decades of flawed understanding. Harvan stood up, his voice rising. This is all very touching, but it does not change the fact that I have a legal purchase contract. I put down a substantial deposit for prime staff dragon specimens. I have buyers waiting across 3 systems. The law is clear. The law also allows for research exemptions, Vesa countered. Specimens demonstrating unique characteristics can be retained for scientific study. Convenient timing for discovering these unique characteristics, Harvan sneered. Right after I arrived to collect my purchase. The tension in the room was suffocating. The council members were murmuring among themselves, clearly divided. Some looked convinced by the data. Others seemed to side with Harvan's legal argument. Then the door opened. A young staffer entered, looking nervous. Apologies for the interruption, but there is an urgent situation with the dragon clutch. Everyone rushed to the observation windows overlooking the main enclosure. David's heart sank, expecting to see violence or injury. Instead, he saw something completely unexpected. Copper and silver were positioned at the center of the clutch, both glowing brightly. But they were not alone. All the other hatchlings had arranged themselves in a specific pattern around the empathic pair. Blaze and Grace formed the inner circle, their larger bodies creating a protective barrier. The smaller hatchlings were in the outer circle, watching the doors. "What are they doing?" Lisa whispered. David understood. They know something is wrong. They can sense the tension, the threat. They are protecting copper and silver. Dragons do not form defensive formations, Harvan scoffed. This is trained behavior. You have been manipulating them. We have not, David pointed at the screen. Watch. As they observed, one of the smaller hatchlings approached the observation window. It looked directly at the gathered officials, then returned to the formation. It took position next to Grace and began glowing softly, copying copper and silver's bioluminescence. Impossible, one of the council members breathed. That hatchling is showing empathic traits, but I thought only the 2 pale ones had that ability. I think it is learned behavior, Lisa said, studying the scans. The empathic dragons are teaching the aggressive ones and vice versa. They are not just balanced, they are adapting to each other. Another hatchling joined the glowing display. Then another. Within minutes, the entire clutch was producing that soft, calming light. The effect was mesmerizing, like watching stars being born. The council chamber was completely silent. Finally, the elderly alien with many eyes spoke. I have studied xenobiology for 200 years. I have never seen anything like this. If dragons can learn empathic responses from each other, it suggests a level of social learning we have never documented in this species. Which means separating them would be scientifically criminal, another council member added. We would be destroying a unique behavioral development for profit. Harvan's face had gone pale. You cannot be serious. My contract will be refunded in full with interest. The beaked council member cut him off. The Galactic Conservation Council recognizes this clutch as a protected research group. No sales will be permitted until full behavioral analysis is complete, which, given the unprecedented nature of these findings, could take years. This is outrageous. Harvan slammed his hand on the table. I have rights as a legal purchaser. You have the right to your money back, the elderly alien said calmly, which you will receive, but these dragons are no longer available for private ownership. The Council will be recommending they receive protected status under the Unique Specimen Act. Harvin looked around the room, searching for support. He found none. Even the council members who had seemed sympathetic to his position were now staring at the dragon clutch with wonder. "You will regret this," Harvin hissed at Vesa. "All of you, I have influence." "Collector Harvin," the beaked alien's voice carried authority, "you are dismissed. Please collect your refund from the business office and vacate the preserve within the hour." Harvin left in a storm of expensive fabric and barely contained rage. After the door sealed behind him, the atmosphere in the room lightened considerably. "Director Vesa," the elderly alien said, "the Council will need to conduct a full investigation of this phenomenon. We will be sending a team of specialists to work with your staff." "They will be welcome," Vesa replied. "We have much to learn." "Indeed." Multiple eyes focused on David. "Mr. Reed, your intuition about these creatures was correct when everyone else was wrong. How did you know to look for social behavior in a supposedly solitary species?" David thought about his answer carefully. "On Earth, we have a saying, 'No man is an island.' Humans are social creatures. We need each other to be complete. When I saw copper and silver being rejected for being different, I recognized something. We have made the same mistake throughout our own history. We cast out people who did not fit our expectations, only to realize later that those differences were not weaknesses. They were strengths we had not learned to value." He looked at the dragon clutch, still holding their protective formation. "I thought maybe dragons were more like humans than we realized. Maybe being different did not mean being defective. Maybe it just meant serving a different purpose." The feathered council member nodded slowly. "Humanity has a unique perspective on diversity. Your species almost destroyed itself learning to value differences. Perhaps that painful history gives you insights others lack." "Perhaps," David agreed. "Or perhaps we just recognize loneliness when we see it. Those aggressive hatchlings were suffering without their empathic siblings. The empathic ones were incomplete without their protectors. They needed each other, but everyone was too focused on individual strength to see it." Lisa stepped forward. "If this pattern holds, it could change how we understand pack formation in dozens of species. How many other creatures are we mislabeling as solitary when they are actually incomplete social groups?" "That is precisely what the Council will investigate," the elderly alien said. "This preserve may have stumbled onto one of the most significant conservation discoveries in decades." After the council members left to begin their formal review, David returned to the observation window. The dragon clutch had relaxed their defensive formation, but copper and silver remained at the center, surrounded by their siblings. Vesa approached and stood beside him. "I owe you an apology, David Reed. You were protecting the preserve, making logical decisions based on available data." "I was being short-sighted." Vesa's crystalline voice held something David had never heard before: warmth. "You saw past the data to something deeper. You recognized that being different was not the same as being worthless. That is wisdom I should have possessed myself." "You listened when it mattered," David said. "That counts for something." Thrin joined them, his mandibles clicking softly. "The human was right. I have been wrong about many things, about weakness, about value, about what makes a specimen worth preserving." He looked at David. "In my culture, admitting error is shameful, but I am learning that humans see it differently. You see it as growth." "We have had a lot of practice being wrong," David said with a slight smile. "Centuries of it. We have learned that admitting mistakes is how you avoid repeating them." In the enclosure, Copper approached the observation window. She looked directly at David and made that soft, chirping sound he had come to recognize as greeting. Behind her, the entire clutch had settled into a peaceful rest, aggressive and empathic dragons intertwined in a single group. "They are beautiful," Lisa said softly, "all of them together, complete." David nodded. Complete was exactly the right word. The aggressive ones provided strength and protection. The empathic ones provided balance and emotional regulation. Together, they were not just surviving, they were thriving. And in that moment, watching the clutch sleep peacefully, David understood something profound about the galaxy itself. Every species, every world, every individual had different strengths. The key was not to rank those strengths, but to recognize how they complemented each other. Copper and silver had been mocked for being different, cast aside as mistakes. But they were not mistakes. They were exactly what their siblings needed to become whole. Sometimes, David thought, the things that look weakest are actually the strongest of all. You just have to know how to see them properly. And maybe, just maybe, humanity's greatest strength was teaching the galaxy how to look. 6 months had changed everything. The preserve's main conference hall was packed with scientists, conservationists, and government officials from across the galaxy. David stood backstage, adjusting his presentation notes while trying to ignore his nervous stomach. Through the curtain, he could hear the crowd murmuring in a dozen different languages. "You will do fine." Lisa handed him a glass of water. "You have presented this data 100 times already." "Not to the Galactic Assembly," David replied. "Not to people who will use this to set conservation policy for the next century." "Then it is a good thing you are right." She squeezed his shoulder. "Go show them what we found." David walked onto the stage to polite applause. The hall's display screens showed the preserve's logo and the title of his presentation, Social Complexity in Starfire Dragons, a Paradigm Shift in Conservation Understanding. 6 months ago, David began, I was asked to dispose of 2 dragon hatchlings because they did not meet standard expectations. They were too small, too quiet, and showed no fire-breathing abilities. By every measurable standard we had been using, they were defects. He pulled up an image of copper and silver as newborns, tiny and dull beside their brilliant siblings. I refused to give up on them, not because I had special knowledge or superior training, but because I recognized something in their rejection. As a human, I come from a species that has repeatedly made the mistake of discarding what we did not understand. We have a long, painful history of labeling differences as defects. The audience was silent, attentive. What we discovered over the following months changed not just how we understand Starfire dragons, but how we think about conservation itself. David advanced to the next slide, showing the clutch before and after reunion. Starfire dragons are not solitary apex predators, as we believed. They are social creatures who require both aggressive and empathic variants to form stable, healthy groups. He walked them through the data, behavioral metrics, stress hormones, health outcomes, social learning patterns. Every chart told the same story. Separated, the dragons suffered. Together, they thrived. The empathic variants, which we had been culling as defective, are actually essential regulators. They moderate aggression, facilitate cooperation, and teach emotional intelligence. The aggressive variants provide protection, resource acquisition, and physical strength. Neither type is complete without the other. A hand rose in the audience. David nodded toward it. Dr. Rendick's Xenobiology Institute. The aliens stood, their form translucent and shifting. Your findings are compelling, but how do we know this is not unique to this one clutch? Perhaps these specific individuals are anomalous. Excellent question. David had been waiting for this. Over the past 4 months, we have been working with 3 other preserves that had culled empathic variants from their clutches. We asked them to allow those variants to survive and be reintegrated. In all 3 cases, we saw the same behavioral patterns emerge. Aggression decreased, cooperation increased. The clutches formed stable social structures. He showed comparison data from all 4 preserves. The patterns were identical. This is not anomalous behavior. This is how Starfire dragons are meant to develop. We have been creating dysfunctional populations by selecting only for traits we valued without understanding the complete picture. Another question, this time from a government official. What are the practical implications? If we must preserve both variants, it will require significant changes to breeding programs and habitat management. Yes, it will, David agreed. But the alternative is continuing to produce incomplete, psychologically damaged populations. We have documentation of aggression problems in captive dragons across the galaxy. breeding failures, inability to reintroduce captive-born dragons to wild populations. All of these issues correlate with the removal of empathic variants. He pulled up a galactic map showing dragon reserves. Red markers indicated facilities with high aggression problems. Blue markers showed facilities that had retained empathic variants. The correlation was stark. The data suggests we have been causing the very problems we thought we were preventing. By removing what we saw as weak, we made the entire species weaker. The presentation continued for another hour. David showed video of the clutch's social interactions, demonstrated their learning capabilities, and presented the theoretical framework for why evolution would favor this dual-type social structure. Finally, he reached his conclusion slide. It showed a recent image of Copper and Silver, now adolescents, resting peacefully among their siblings. "When I look at these dragons," David said quietly, "I see a lesson that extends far beyond one species. How many times do we dismiss what we do not understand? How often do we mistake difference for deficiency?" He paused, meeting eyes across the audience. "On Earth, we nearly destroyed ourselves because we could not value diversity. We went to war over differences in appearance, belief, and ability. It took us thousands of years to learn that our strength came not from uniformity, but from the combination of different perspectives and capabilities. These dragons taught us that nature understood that lesson long before we did. Evolution does not create defects by accident. Sometimes what looks like weakness is actually a different kind of strength, waiting for someone to recognize its value." The applause when he finished was genuine and sustained. David left the stage feeling wrung out but satisfied. The hard part was done. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Assembly passed new conservation guidelines. Empathic variants were to be protected in all dragon breeding programs. Facilities were required to maintain natural clutch compositions. Funding was allocated for research into other species that might show similar dual variant patterns. The preserve became a research center, hosting scientists from across the galaxy who wanted to study the dragon clutch. Copper and Silver, the hatchlings everyone had wanted to discard, became the most studied dragons in the galaxy. One evening, David sat in the observation room, watching the now mature clutch. They had grown considerably. Blaze was enormous, his crimson scales gleaming like molten metal. Grace was equally impressive, her golden coloring bright enough to hurt the eyes. The smaller members of the clutch had developed into sleek, quick hunters. And Copper and Silver, still smaller than their siblings, had grown into their roles as the clutch's emotional center. They moved through the group with quiet confidence, their presence calming and centering the more aggressive members. "They are magnificent." Vessa entered the observation room, her crystalline form reflecting the enclosure's lights. "All of them." "They are," David agreed, "together. I have been reviewing the data from other preserves implementing our protocols." Vessa pulled up a report on her data pad. "Aggression incidents are down across the board. Breeding success rates are improving. Several facilities report the first successful wild releases in decades." "Because the dragons are complete now," David said. "They have all the tools they need to survive." "The Assembly wants to name the empathic variant formally," Vessa continued. "They are proposing Starfher dragons, empathic subspecies. But I had another thought." She looked at David. "Why not call them what they are, heart dragons, just like the ancient texts described?" David smiled. "Heart dragons, I like that." Thrin appeared in the doorway, his mandibles clicking in what David had learned was approval. "The new clutch has hatched in Sector 4, 3 aggressive variants, 2 empathic ones, perfect distribution. The Keepers are keeping them together from the start this time." "Good," David stood up. "Want to go see them?" "Obviously," Thrin's compound eyes gleamed. "I want to document the early bonding behaviors for the research records." As they walked through the preserve together, David felt a deep sense of contentment. 6 months ago, he had been fighting to save 2 lives everyone else thought were worthless. Now, those 2 lives had sparked a revolution in conservation science. They reached the nursery where the new clutch rested. The hatchlings were tiny, barely bigger than David's hand. The three aggressive ones were bright crimson and gold. The two empathic ones were pale copper and silver, just like their predecessors. And just like before, the empathic hatchlings were being rejected by their siblings. The tiny, aggressive ones pushed them away from the warming light, snapped when they tried to approach, hoarded the food. But this time, the keepers did not separate them. They watched, took notes, and waited. David knelt beside the enclosure, watching a small copper hatchling try again and again to approach her aggressive siblings, never giving up despite being rejected. She was persistent, gentle, patient. "Give it time," he whispered to her. "They do not understand yet, but they will. They need you, even if they do not know it." As if she had heard him, the copper hatchling looked in David's direction. Her amber eyes were bright with intelligence and determination. She chirped once, then turned back to her siblings. She tried again. This time, the largest aggressive hatchling paused before snapping at her. He looked at her for a long moment, tilted his head, and took a step closer instead of pushing her away. It was a small moment, barely noticeable, but David recognized its significance. The beginning of understanding, the first step toward becoming complete. Lisa joined them at the observation window, history repeating itself. "History correcting itself," David replied. "This time, we know what we are looking at." "Do you think they will be okay, the empathic ones?" David watched the copper hatchling finally reach her aggressive sibling. She pressed her snout gently against his side. The aggressive hatchling did not pull away. Instead, he leaned into the contact, and for just a moment, both hatchlings relaxed. "They will be more than okay," David said. "They will be exactly what they are meant to be. Different, yes, but not defective, never defective." "Just different purposes," Lisa said softly. "Exactly." That night, David sat in his quarters and wrote in his personal log. He had started keeping it the day he met Copper and Silver, and now it filled an entire data drive. He wrote, "We spend so much time looking for strength in obvious places. Big claws, sharp teeth, bright colors, loud voices, and we miss the quieter strengths that hold everything together. Patience, empathy, understanding, the ability to see others' pain and want to help. Copper and Silver taught me that what looks weak might be the strongest thing in the room. They taught me that being different is not the same as being broken. And they taught me that sometimes the most important role is not being the warrior or the hunter. Sometimes it is being the one who reminds the warriors why they fight and the hunters what they are protecting." I came to this preserve thinking I would help conserve a species. Instead, a species conserved me. They reminded me why I became a scientist in the first place, not to categorize and control nature, but to understand and appreciate it. Tomorrow, I start working on a proposal for expanded research into empathic variants in other species. Vesa thinks we will find similar patterns in at least a dozen other creatures we have been mislabeling as solitary. We might be on the edge of rewriting conservation biology entirely. But tonight, I am just grateful. Grateful I listened to instinct instead of data. Grateful I saw beyond measurements and standards. Grateful that two small, quiet dragons taught the galaxy to value silence as much as roaring, gentleness as much as strength, and differences as much as similarities. And grateful that humanity's painful history of learning to embrace diversity gave me the eyes to recognize what others had missed. Sometimes our scars are our greatest teachers, and sometimes being human, with all our messy, emotional, illogical impulses, is exactly what the universe needs. David closed the log and looked at a photo on his desk. It showed him kneeling in the dragon enclosure, surrounded by the entire clutch. Copper was draped across his shoulders. Silver rested in his lap. The aggressive dragons formed a protective circle around them all. Family, David thought, not by blood or biology, but by choice and understanding. Different species, different abilities, different strengths, but together, complete. His communicator chimed. A message from Vesa Council approved your expanded research proposal. Funding secured. We start next month. Well done, David Reed. David smiled and sent back a simple reply. We start together. In the main enclosure, visible through his window, the adolescent dragon clutch settled down for the night. Copper and silver took their places at the center, their gentle glow providing a nightlight for their siblings. The aggressive dragons arranged themselves protectively around the empathic ones. And in the nursery, a tiny copper hatchling finally convinced her aggressive sibling to share the warming light. They curled up together, different but learning to be complete. David turned off his lights and looked out at the stars beyond the preserve. Somewhere out there were other species, other creatures being mislabeled and misunderstood, other differences being mistaken for defects. But now there was proof, evidence, data showing that diversity was not just aesthetically pleasing or morally right. It was evolutionarily essential. The galaxy had mocked the Dragon Barbies for being different. They had called them defects, mistakes, failures. They had wanted to throw them away. But a human knew the truth. Because humans had made the same mistakes, learned the same lessons, and paid for that knowledge with centuries of conflict and pain. And if humanity's suffering could spare other species that same pain, if Earth's bloody history could teach the galaxy to value differences instead of fearing them, then maybe all that struggle had been worth it. David closed his eyes and thought of Copper and Silver sleeping peacefully among their siblings. Different but never defective. Quiet but never weak. Small but holding the whole clutch together. Perfect in ways no one had known to look for. Until someone who understood being different took the time to see.